So I spend a lot of my spare nights doing deliveries for DoorDash. It's my way of getting extra money while also not needing to commit to a more strict second job. I started driving around 9 p.m. on this night and steadily took on some orders until around 11, where it slowed down a bit. During this time, I just drove around the shopping center that had most of the fast food restaurants people often ordered from, and eventually another order came through. It was a regular order to be delivered, about 4 miles away. After getting the food, I started the directions to the address, and it was almost immediately apparent that it wasn't a house. I scrolled in on the map, which only showed streets and buildings, and the address I pointed to was a long street that had no buildings on it. It looked kind of like an empty plot of land, but the DoorDash map was never that great, so I just started driving and decided to at least check it out and maybe call the customer if there was an issue. So I drove out, just taking about 20 minutes until I reached the street it was on. This street was very bare, no houses or crossroads, and no cars driving on it. When I got to the end, it became a gravel road, and on the side was a small wooden sign that was too weathered to be legible. I pulled onto the gravel and turned my brights on, and right away, I could see something far off down the road. I drove in closer, and as I approached it, my phone dinged to let me know that I'd arrived. In my headlights was a small mobile home, or some kind of RV, and on the door were poorly painted numbers. I looked back on my phone. 2760. It was the address. I got out holding the food in my hand as I walked up to the RV. Getting closer, it was a bit unsettling to look at. It was overgrown and old, which was strange considering it was a mobile home, meant to be moving around. I gave it a knock and waited. This was a rare cash order, which made more sense once I saw the place, but it definitely didn't make me feel good having to stand here. As I looked around, an eerie feeling loomed over me. This place was surrounded by the woods, with no lights anywhere. Past the RV, it was complete darkness. I heard something from inside, and I prepared for them to open the door, but then a voice to my right startled me. I looked over and saw a man smiling at me, standing by the corner of the RV. He asked if I had his order, and I nodded, apologizing, and walking it over to him. I handed it off and said his total. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, then smiled again, and said he just needed to grab the rest of the cash. He turned and walked back around the RV, while I stayed where I was. The whole interaction in writing doesn't seem as off as it was in person, but I can tell you there was something very wrong about this guy. It was just something about the way he acted and said everything that gave me chills. I waited for a minute or so before getting more nervous and looking around a corner to see where he went. In the distance, I saw a figure standing by what looked like the dark outline of a shed. They were not walking, they were just standing there. As the fear grew inside me, my head jolted around, hearing the door to the RV opening. A different man looked out at me, and just as I started to greet him, he slammed the door shut, my heartbeat now intensifying. I looked back out at the man who was by the shed. He was now walking back toward the RV, but had something else in his hands. In that moment, I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it was either a long bat or a rifle. I ran back to the car, getting in and turning it on with shaky hands as I put it in reverse. The man came around the side of the mobile home and stood calmly in the darkness as I drove off. I don't know what happened there, but I wasn't exactly keen on finding out. I went straight home afterwards and debated calling 911, but I was caught up on the fact that I didn't actually know what was going on. In the end, I made the regretful decision not to notify the police. Whatever happened that night will remain as just as the strange encounter it was, with no answers to the true nature of it. Over the last 5 years, I've been working at different odd jobs all around the country. I live in a van, so I move around a lot, but a few months out of the year, I have to stay in the area for an extended amount of time in order to rack up some cash before moving on. At this time, I was staying in the mid-east portion of Utah and had taken up a job at a gas station. It was located on a road that was really only used by locals to go in and out of the state without having to deal with the highway traffic. There was nothing else on this route. It was simply a road with a lone gas station for the occasional driver to fill up at. That's kind of why it was perfect for me, though because of the location of it didn't matter. Since I lived in a van, I could easily stay out there for an extended amount of time and work. Anyway, I'd been there for a bit over a month, and up to this point, I was still working random shifts. This day, I was working 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was really not a special night by any means. No customers aside from a few stopping by the pumps, and not much to do. As far as stocking or anything, I was mostly standing around on my phone, or pacing around the store and making the shelves look nice. Then at 1 a.m., a customer pulled into the station, parking in one of the few spaces right in front of the door. Knowing they must be coming inside, I went back to the counter. A man got out and came into the shop looking over and smiling at me, then giving me a nod as he turned down one of the aisles. He started whistling as he looked at a couple things, picking them up and putting them back, then continuing down the aisle and repeating this. I wasn't sure if he was just taking a break from driving or if he actually needed something, but the items he was picking up and looking at were all different and didn't actually seem interested in buying them. Then he abruptly stopped whistling, walked over to the door, and left. I didn't think he stole anything, but it was strange. He got into his car and started moving around, reaching into his back seat before getting back out of his car and coming to the shop again. After seeing that, I wasn't feeling too comfortable. This seemed almost exactly how I thought an armed robbery would begin, but the aggression I was expecting when he came back in didn't happen. He walked over to the counter and asked how my night was starting, a quick back and forth of small talk. I acted as normal as I could, just in case I was overthinking anything. But then he asked if I could help him with his car. He said his tires needed air and that he didn't see any pumps outside. This station didn't have any air pumps for self-use, but we did carry a handheld air compressor for emergency situations. I got it out and followed him to his car. He pointed down at the tire that needed it, and I ducked down, putting the compressor line in. I had it in for less than 10 seconds, before it read the pressure to be at the right level. I looked over at the man, seeing him looking down at me with no expression. I took everything out and stood up, starting to walk back to the shop, when he stopped me by rushing in front of the door. His right hand was deep inside his jacket pocket, as he stared at me with a cold face. I told him to move, but of course he stayed in front of the door, though I could see it in his eyes that he was preparing to do something. I took a step back, trying to say what I could do to calm the tensity of the situation. But just as I thought he was going to snap, he suddenly ran around me and got into his car, pulling out aggressively and speeding away. I took this time to go inside and call 911, and surprisingly they arrived out here only minutes later. They were already on the chase looking for the exact car the man was driving. The officers stated the man was on the run from a recently committed crime near the border. They didn't give me any details, but the way they said it, it made it think it was just some small robbery. After my quick statement, they got on the road again, and after that, I never got an update. I tried to look up recent crimes and everything, but I could not find anything useful. I don't know what he was planning to do, or why he actually stopped at the station, but my best guess could have been to steal my van and conceal his tracks, or at least delay them. However, depending on what crime he had just committed, I think my life could have easily been at risk, and why he chose not to do anything to me is unknown. It was just past 11 p.m. and I was in the back room of our building, moving boxes around. It was just a regular hardware store, and I was an overnight stalker there. My other coworker that I usually work with was on vacation, so it was just me for the night. I didn't mind though, because people always expect less from you when you're left alone to do all the work. So if anything didn't get done, it wouldn't really matter. I was working slowly, taking my time. All the deliveries that came in during the day needed to be put by the aisles where they belonged. So I was just breaking down the pallets and putting boxes on the carts that I would then roll onto the main shopping area and stock the boxes from there. Once I had filled a few carts, I grabbed one and pushed it into the aisle on the far left. It was raining, or maybe even storming, pretty heavily outside though. Through the rain, I thought I heard something from the front of the building. I didn't really care, not even crossing my mind for a second, that it was anything other than the building making noises. I took a few boxes and started stocking, humming to myself to save me from the boredom. But then again, I thought I heard something. I walked down to the front of the store and looked all the way at the other end, where the front door was. There didn't seem to be anything, or anyone. I stayed there for a little bit again, and no rush to work. And then it happened again. I could have sworn this time that I saw something moving by the front door, and that was where the sound seemed to come from. Being in my place of work, with all the doors locked, I wasn't really afraid of anything, but more just wanted to make sure nothing strange was going on outside. So I went up to the front door and looked out the glass, which I noticed had huge smudges and scratches on them. Nothing was outside, no cars or people, just heavy rain pouring down. I turned and started walking away, back to where I was working. It was quiet for a while, maybe a whole hour even, but then the sound came again, from the front door. I dropped what I was doing immediately and walked back to the front, and from across the store, I could for sure make out a figure moving around outside the door. I began walking closer before the figure stopped. It stood still for a second, then ran away. I ran up to the door trying to catch a glimpse of the person, but it was just too dark and rainy. Looking at the door, though, there were definitely more marks on it than there was before. I was confident that this person was trying to break in. So I pulled out my phone, still standing by the door, and called the police. The operator said it wouldn't be too long, just a few minutes. So I put my phone back in my pocket and waited by the door. Looking around, the parking lot was still empty, but then I turned my head to look against the building, and on the very side was that same figure. I backed away quickly, worried that he may have seen me. I took several steps back and tried to be quiet. Not even 10 seconds later, the figure appeared right outside the door, while the glass was somewhat foggy and had raindrops all over it. I could tell he was looking at me. Slam, something against the window. It looked like maybe a large rock. Then he hit it again and again, trying to break the glass. I backed away quicker and ran to the back of the store, locking myself in the office. Through the building, I heard the glass shatter and the alarm by the door go off. I waited in fear, hearing nothing else. A few minutes of silence passed, and I was growing more and more nervous, until the police finally showed up. I heard them call out and walk around, searching the place before they got to the office, where I identified myself and told them what I knew. The guy wasn't in the store, so I guess after he broke the glass, he just left. It seems really weird, and doesn't make any sense. Part of me even wishes that he'd actually stolen something, so that I'd at least know that that was what he wanted to do after. But given he didn't do anything after breaking down the door, I don't know what he wanted, and that is what still scares me to this day. Thank you all for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed the stories, and if you guys did, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe. I really enjoy hearing from you, and I would love to narrate your content if you want me to read any of it. With that said, as always, stay depraved.